Hello and welcome, my dear online book club friends. I'm Gustavo Tolosa, and today is our live session. But of course, you can always watch this as a replay when I email it to you, and then it's put on my YouTube channel. We are currently reading Food is Climate by Glenn Mercer. And remember, when you purchase this book on Amazon, whether it's paperback or Kindle or audio, if you send Glenn an email with proof of purchase, he will send you a gift of several. I think it's at least 25, but he'll be here in just a second. Extra recipes, delicious recipes. And so you just have to write on the subject line Gustavo, and he will know that it's coming from the book club. So today we have a special treat for you, and I'm going to welcome Glenn. Hello, Glenn.
Hello, Gustavo. How are you?
Good, good. It's so nice to see you every Monday night here with us. So I've asked our audience to read the foreword and also chapter 3, which is called The Story We've Been Told. But since we have a surprise for everyone, and that surprise is going to take a little extra time, today we will give you a shortened version of chapter 3, and then next week we'll do chapter 3 in more depth and then move on to chapter 4. So that's going to be your assignment for next week. And today I just want to ask Glenn to give us an overview of what is the story we've been told.
Well, the story we've been told is that the climate is warming because of the burning of fossil fuels, because of our manufacturing plants and energy plants and our cars. All these molecules of carbon dioxide are going into the atmosphere and they're heating the planet. And we hear that all the time. We hear that from Al Gore. We hear that from climate spokesmen. We hear that from the government. And it isn't completely wrong. It's true that all those things are contributing to climate change, but that's a small part of the problem. And it's a manageable part of the problem. And so, yes, it'll be good if we move to renewable energy, solar and wind. And of course, we're already doing that to a great extent, but we need to do that more. It'll be good if people drive in electric cars and have solar panels. But we've been doing this for 30 years. For 30 years, we've been hearing about climate change, and we've been saying we need to have solar panels and wind turbines. And we currently burn more fossil fuels than we did 30 years ago. So clearly this isn't working. Clearly this isn't the solution. And the good news is it isn't really the leading cause of climate change anyway. So we're never going to solve the problem that way by focusing only on fossil fuels. And it isn't really 90% of the problem. It's more like 10 or 15% of the problem is the burning of fossil fuels. The book cites a paper by Dr. Silas Rao that the leading cause of climate change, the real problem, is animal agriculture. Now, how could that be? How could it be that animal agriculture, you picture maybe, a pig farm or a cattle farm, and if you picture them in a bucolic way, you picture the cows and the pigs running around in the field. How could that be possibly causing more climate change than all the burning of fossil fuels in the world, all the coal burning and so forth? And the answer is, there are many parts of the answer, but the big part of the answer is land use. 43% of the non-ice land surface of the earth is dedicated to animal agriculture. So we have cows and sheep and goats grazing vast, vast areas of the earth. And if they weren't, if we didn't put cattle and sheep and goats on this land, we could free it up to have forests. If we had forests on 43% more of the earth, even on half of that, we would draw down enough carbon dioxide to solve the problem. The other part of it is the oceans, which are 70% of the earth, which are being destroyed by industrial fishing, which dredge up soil from the bottom of the ocean, dredge up sediment from the bottom of the ocean. We need to protect the oceans, and so we need to stop the fishing. And so if we protected the oceans and we protected the land, and the phytoplankton came back in the oceans, the forests came back on the land, we would draw down enough carbon dioxide to solve the problem. And then we could still fly on the occasional airplane and drive our cars. So we could keep modern society. But there's no way that we can keep modern society with all the cars and all the boats and all the trucks and all the manufacturing if we keep eating meat. So that's the true story. The true story is that the leading cause of global warming is animal agriculture. And all these arguments are explained in detail in the book, and it's a very short book. It's 59 pages, plus Philip Wollen's wonderful foreword, which we'll talk about in a minute. And if people buy this very inexpensive book and send an email to foodisclimate@gmail.com, foodisclimate@gmail.com, put Gustavo in the subject line, I'll personally send you a bonus file of 25 healthy, low-fat vegan recipes in addition to the 65 that are already in the book. So that's 90 recipes.
All right, very good. Well, thank you, Glenn, for giving us the overview here of this chapter 3, which I'd like to talk about it in more detail next week. But I do want to move on to our very special guest. This is something that it truly is unusual to have such a personality here in the book club. So Philip Wollen here wrote the foreword of Glenn's book. And I hope that you read it, because it is a very powerful few pages. And this man is an incredible human being. Glenn and I had the opportunity to interview him last night, exactly 24 hours ago, well, 23 and a half, because he lives in Australia, so the time difference is very big. So we interviewed him last night, and this interview is a gold. It's I think everybody that you know needs to watch it. So please forward this to other people. It's going to be embedded in this webinar that we're doing tonight live, but I will also upload it to my YouTube channel as a video on its own, so that you can also forward that. But Glenn, tell us a little bit, or tell our audience here a little bit about this incredible person, Philip Wollen.
Well, I've known of Philip Wollen for many years, but I first met him via Zoom about a year ago, before the book came out. And he is a philanthropist and an animal rights activist in Australia. He used to be a senior executive with Citibank, and he could have chosen to try to become, Bill Gates, to try to become one of the wealthiest men on earth. But he decided instead to give his money away, and he is a philanthropist on behalf of children and people who are impoverished, and on behalf of the animals, and on behalf of the oceans. And he, you could read about the many good causes that he, serves with his fortune. And he's just a great man and a great speaker. You could also find online a debate he gave where the subject was, should meat be off the menu? I'll read you just a couple of lines from his foreword that gives you an example of how powerful a writer and speaker he is. He says, "Meat is not an industry, it is an atrocity, a squalid, cruel bacchanalia of butchery. It has no place in civilized society." So he speaks his mind, and he speaks very powerfully, and I'm honored that he was good enough to write the foreword to my book.
Yes, yes. I truly felt honored last night to be in his presence, and I don't say this lightly. It was. You could feel that you were in front of someone that was a very powerful speaker, and yet he was a humble and man. But he does speak his mind because he's very passionate about it. So make sure that if you're watching this video, later on, you will click on the description of the video and you will see his bio there. But Glenn has given you a good idea, although there's much more about him. So Glenn, are we ready to watch? I am actually excited to watch this again because it has so much amazing information. And please, as you watch this, feel free to type comments or questions because Glenn and I are here. We're not leaving, so we can answer questions or comments. But do try to focus on what Mr. Wollen is saying because it's very powerful, and we should all really ponder upon his words. So here we go. Welcome, and thank you for making the time, Mr. Wollen, to be in our book club.
Thank you, Gustavo. Please call me Philip.
All right, very good.
Thank you.
And hello, Glenn.
Hello, Gustavo. Philip, it's wonderful to see you again.
You too, Glenn.
You know how grateful I am to you for writing the foreword to Food is Climate. In that foreword, you write that animal agriculture is the greatest scam on earth, taxpayer-funded animal agriculture. And that's certainly true in the United States. I wanted to ask you, is animal agriculture also subsidized in Australia as well?
Subsidizing, subsidizing animal agriculture is endemic everywhere. It's certainly Australia, right through Asia. I gave a speech in the European Parliament in Brussels and at the European Union. And Europe is heavily subsidized. And this is an absolute blight on any civilized mind. I just sketched something out for you, Glenn, and your listeners, if I may. You can cut it out later if you wish. In human history, only 7.5 billion people have ever lived. And yet we humans, we torture and kill 2 billion sentient, living, loving animals every week. We stab and suffocate 1 billion ocean animals every 8 hours. If human beings were killed at the same rate, we would be wiped out in 1 weekend. Now we know that the oceans are dying in our time. By 2048, all our fisheries will be dead, and they are the lungs and the arteries of the earth. Oceans sequester more CO2 than all the forests of the world put together. Every second breath of air that we take, of oxygen that we intake into our lungs, comes from the oceans. And trillions of fish for agriculture are ground up into pellets to feed to livestock. Vegetarian cows are now the world's largest ocean predators. 10,000 species are wiped out every year because of the actions of one species. And we now face the 6th mass extinction in cosmological history. This means that no child under the age of 5 is ever going to reach retirement age. It's a mathematical impossibility. Now, if any other organism had done this, a biologist would call it a virus. It is a crime of unimaginable proportions. And it's all done by human beings, and the greatest negative vector force in this entire web comes from animal agriculture, pure and simple. There is no longer any room for argument. So I always say that this anthropocentrism is the ultimate sin. If Moses could have spelled it, he would have put it in his top 10. This quaint notion that everything should be seen through a purely human prism. So that's where we are. And that is why animal agriculture is so heavily subsidized by these cabals of vested interests, funded largely by the meat dairy lobby in all the parliaments all around the world. Politics has now hijacked human civilization, and politicians generally have very short-term time horizons. So it's endemic, it's everywhere.
Philip, I would like to ask you, I know that you are a well-known philanthropist, and I was just curious, are many of the causes that you support related to animal rights?
Yes, I describe more of myself as an activist or a pro-activist, but I donate money to projects around the world. Today I support about 500 projects in about 40 countries. And I started off by being fairly focused on the 5 fingers: children, animals, the environment, the terminally ill, and aspiring youth. But I'd have to say that about 80% of all the capital I allocate to the projects go into animal-related projects. Now, you may well ask why. I would say that animal rights is the most powerful positive vector force that we have. If we want to protect the environment, we want to protect ourselves against climate change, if we want to improve our fiscal, financial budgets, if we want to improve our ethics, we start at the most powerful leverage point, and that is animal agriculture. And of course, as a consequence of that, I'm probably rather outspoken in the need for us to go vegan. I say to people all around the world that veganism is the Swiss Army knife of an ethical future. One instrument solves our financial, our ethical, our water-related, our human health, our fiscal budgets, our hospital waiting lists. One instrument solves these things at the same time, and it ends animal cruelty forever. And it's so good for us, it's so ethically sound, and it's so easy to do. So that is how I actually became vegan. So to answer your question, do I focus on animals? Yes, I focus on all animals. Most of it is to non-human animals, but I also take care of human animals as well, with hospitals and clinics and places like that.
Philip, you mentioned in your forward making speeches in front of Nobel laureates and making the case that the Western diet is destroying the environment. And you mentioned that none of them argued with you. My question to you is, did any of them adopt your position or tell you that they agree with you?
Every single one of them said they agree with me. I was perhaps too polite to ask if they had ever thought of changing their ways. I think the one who was the most difficult to pin down was Al Gore. But he did say in the conversation that his next book will address the issue of animal agriculture, because his first book did not. So Al Gore was the toughest one to pin down. But the only arguments I seem to get nowadays comes from the squalid, nasty, dishonest, ignoble meat and dairy lobby. They now realize that they are on the wrong side of history, and they operate in sunset industries. These industries will go broke. By definition, they will go broke because they deserve to. They will go broke. So I say that the next billionaires are going to be people who invest heavily in the technology and the distribution systems and the capital raisings of plant-based diets. That's where the money will be made. And I think that day is approaching very rapidly.
How long do you think it will take for animal agriculture to go broke? How do you see this unfolding?
Well, then it's a bit like a curate's egg, good in parts. Some industries will go broke quicker, and I would say that the writing is on the wall for the dairy industry. They are sinking fast. Dairy industries will also have a mixed reaction because it'll be manifested in different countries at different speeds. For example, in Israel, veganism is growing very significantly. Unfortunately, in India, the dairy industry, India has the world's largest dairy herd. Dairy still continues to have a stranglehold on the psyche of the Indian community. And unfortunately, India also has the largest live animal export industry, which is a shame. I'm sure, Glenn, you would remember me saying to you at one stage, the most beautiful word ever written at any time, in any country, in any language in human history, came from India, from the Upanishads 3,000 years ago. Ahimsa, non-violence to any living being. Now, if we believe that, by definition, we must be vegan. Now, not because veganism defines our politics, our religion, our caste, our creed, or our lifestyle, but because it describes our character. Being vegan defines our character because it says we reject violence wherever and whenever it occurs. So when will these industries go broke? I would say one day, and I hope it won't be long. Certainly, I hope in my lifetime, many of these industries will be, in fact, technically, they're all broke now. Every single one of them is broke. The only reason they survive is because, one, they get heavily subsidized, and two, they never have to pay the cost of their externalities. If they had to pay the cost of the damage they're doing to the environment, to human health, and to all the other damaging aspects of civilized life, and they adopted GAAP, which is generally accepted accounting principles, all these companies would be broke. They would not be able to raise $1 on the capital market. Not one, because all of them would be reporting losses. So they're alive, they're on life support systems, and we don't know it, and I don't think they know it yet. But I think the time is coming when those externalities will have to be funded, and they will be the first casualties. My only question is, in the meantime, how many innocent animal lives will be lost? How many human lives will be lost? How much damage will be done to the environment? How many small island states are going to be underwater as a consequence of the nastiness of the animal agriculture industry, which is the greatest negative vector force, as you know and have written very powerfully about it, the greatest negative vector force on climate change. That is the question.
Right. It is. Well, this is certainly a very fascinating topic, and I'm just wondering, do you think that we still have time to revert this, or is it getting to the point where it's too late?
I think I'm always hopeful. I think I am always hopeful. I'm sure you remember that Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, said that never doubt that a few committed people can change the world. Indeed, that is the only thing that ever has. Well, a few people can do great things. I mean, just look, there are only about 15 million Jews in the world, but they play such a powerful role in international affairs. Just look at the number of Nobels they win every year. My wife Trix and I sat in the stadium at the Olympic Games, full of pride, as Australia, with a population smaller than Florida, won more medals than every country in the world, with the exception of China, Russia, and the United States, a small country like us. Tibet's population is only 3 million people, but who hasn't heard of the plight of the Tibetan? Everybody. But there are over 600 million vegetarians and vegans in the world, and that is bigger than the United States, England, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Canada, New Zealand, Singapore, Australia, Israel, all put together. If we were one nation, we would be bigger than the 27 nations of the European Union. We are bigger than NATO. We are bigger than OPEC. And despite this massive demographic footprint, we are still drowned out by the raucous hunt and shoot and kill and cretins who believe that violence is the answer when it should not even be a question. So, do we have time? We need to mobilize and we need to work together. Unfortunately, the animal protection movement is highly balkanized, and getting them to go in a similar direction is like herding cats. But that's just one more challenge we have to face, and it's a challenge we can't afford to avoid. So do we have time? I hope so. I hope so. I am optimistic, but I'm not complacent. Essentially, I guess that I'm a prisoner of what I know. I'm sort of held hostage by my conscience. And in a sense, I'm chained to my past by my family and friends and my education, my culture, and my upbringing. So I think I'm probably, like most people, permanently tethered to the ground, which restricts me to some extent to moving around in a circle. But I have to remain optimistic, otherwise I wouldn't be able to do what I do. I'm sort of reminded, in some sense, of Albert Camus' book, Return to Tipasa. He said that in the depths of winter, I finally learned that within me lay an invincible summer. So when times are really difficult and dark, and as you know, with so many projects around the world, I've seen the worst in human nature, and their violence and their mendacity and their cruelty is focused so powerfully on powerless animals, non-human animals. I do feel depressed and despondent, but once again, I think of Tipasa, and I do think that there's always hope.
Philip, in recent years, Australia has seen a lot of terrible wildfires. Did you ever see that in Australia before? And how much of that do you attribute to animal agriculture?
Australia is a land of bushfires. That's an absolute fact. But what we've seen in recent times has been so far beyond the pale, it bears very, very little comparison. These are not natural. Australia has the world's worst record of mammalian extinction. In the 2020 bushfire, Australia lost 3 billion animals, 3 billion in a nation with 24 million people. A vast percentage of that has to be attributed to our very bad land management policies. We have clear-felled our forests. We've built up a monoculture. I get into a lot of trouble with the politicians here in Australia for saying we've become a nation of factory farmers and and quarrymen, mining and agriculture. That's what we do, and it is absolutely shameful. The fires here we had in Australia were bigger than the whole of England. Just imagine that. You could see it from space. So the bushfires here have been absolutely dreadful. And you've seen something similar in California, but I think ours were infinitely worse.
Wow.
But I think we seem to once again adopt a fairly anthropocentric view of life. Let's deal with climate change. And that's a very important issue, of course. Absolutely. But I think there are such powerful lobby groups, as you know, fighting against getting this issue onto the table. I'm very concerned that water is going to be the next immediate problem that we face. I've said this before. Water is the new oil. Nations will soon be going to war over it. Himalayan ice fields are correctly called the third pole because they feed half the world's population through the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Yellow River, the Yangtze, the Irrawaddy, the Mekong. And these glaciers are melting fast. I said to Muhammad Yunus after he'd won the Nobel that all the good that he had done with the Grameen Bank would vanish when Bangladesh drowns. To say nothing of Mumbai, Calcutta, Ho Chi Minh City, and over 100 large cities in other countries which are on the coast. And this is going to happen. Now just imagine, say temperatures reach 3 degrees, rise 3 degrees, or we have a 500 parts per million. That will create 100 million eco-refugees in our region alone, here in Southeast Asia. It is going to be an absolute catastrophe. And this will reshape the geopolitical landscape forever. So our risks, sure, climate change is a significant risk and it's coming at us very fast. But an American guy, Admiral Denny Begin, he was the chief of US warfighting requirements. And he said, we have learned from experience that nations will raid and invade long before they starve. These nations are going to starve, they're going to run out of water, and they're going to fight. And there'll be nothing we can do to stop it. So the solution to this problem is to address it now, while we still have a little bit of time on our hands. Open up our doors, our hearts, our minds, and get off this meat and dairy drug, share our wealth, and turn our swords into plowshares. We don't need to fight. And of course, if you look at the animal agriculture industry, we pump a lot of antibiotics into animals, as you know. Antibiotic resistance is going to cost $100 trillion a year. $100 trillion a year. And it's going to kill 10 million people every year by 2050. Now, what kind of Mad Hatter economics or society are we building? So I got very badly attacked. Unfortunately, Australia has a very gerrymandered political system. It's a little bit like, I'd say, the United States, but probably worse. We have a very small rural meat and dairy, mining, forestry party, which controls the government. And they have a very small percentage of the vote, but they control the government. And at the Australian of the Year Awards, I was, I'd like to say interviewed, but I was interrogated by one of their journalists. And I'm still shocked. And he's a mainstream journalist too. He said, Mr. Wollen, I'm surprised a man of your character would say that meat is murder, a little old lady with a Vajragar is offending God, livestock production is unethical, there will be no peace until we stop killing animals. Animals are like human children. And can't you see how offensive that is to our rural audience? And he said it very aggressively. So this was my diplomatic, if you like, counterpunch. I said, well, if you're going to quote me, at least do it honestly. I did say, a robin redbreast in a cage puts all heaven in a rage. But that came from William Blake in Auguries of Innocence. And I did say, yes, so the commandment, thou shalt not kill, applies to the murder of any living being. It was inscribed on the human heart long before it was proclaimed from Mount Sinai. But actually, that was Leo Tolstoy. And I did say, true, that the roots of cruelty are not strong, just widespread. But the time will come when inhumanity, protected by custom, will succumb to humanity, championed by thought. A man is ethical only when all life is sacred to him. But that was actually Albert Schweitzer, winner of the Nobel Prize. And I did say, as long as we kill animals, there'll never be peace. It's only one step to the concentration camps of Hitler and Stalin. There will be no peace as long as a man will stand with a knife and murder those who are weaker than him. But that was Isaac Singer, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. And yes, I admit, I did have something to say about animals and children. The wolf will lie down with the lamb, the leopard with the young goat, the young lion with the young ones of the herd, and a little child will lead them. That came from the prophet Isaiah. I know I didn't say a thing about animals and children. Not a word. That wasn't me. And neither did I say anything about greed and ambition. That wasn't me either. That was actually Jesus. Behold the birds of the air and the lilies of the field. King Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed as one of these. And for good measure he threw in a left hook and said, whatever you do to the least of these my brethren, you did it to me. So are you as a journalist suggesting that your rural audience is offended by Nobel Prize winners and the prophets? Or should I just go home and burn my books? I seem to recall that was the strategy favored by Pol Pot. Well, the journalist from this big newspaper was livid and he wrote a nasty article about me, calling me a radical. Well, frankly, I think we need another radical to remind us that we are not the center of the universe. So that is my position. Right now, I focus most of my activism, apart from the projects that we have around the world, on speaking to large corporations, to governments, meeting in boardrooms, explaining to businesses how much better off they would be if they adopted ethics as a core principle in everything they do. I ask them very simple questions, Glenn. Suppose the whole market knew, the whole capital markets, equity markets, everybody knew that you were an ethical company. You treated your staff well, your stakeholders well, you protected the environment, you looked after the health of the people who worked for you, who came to deal with you, and you adopted a vegan lifestyle at home. Everyone knew you were ethical, responsible people. Tell me, what effect do you think that would have on your company? Would your weighted average cost of capital go up or down? Would you find it easier to raise money on the capital markets? Would you attract more highly qualified people to work for you? Any CEO who gets any of those answers wrong ought to be fired. So that's the kind of message when I speak in boardrooms nowadays. They're the types of questions, and that's the tone I adopt. And it's not very hard to actually demonstrate that by having an ethical, well thought out business, you create wealth for your employees, for your company, your shareholders, and your stakeholders. And it is what we call a BGO, a blinding glimpse of the obvious. I know of no industry that likes to kill their own customers, and the meat and dairy industry are killing their customers. That's how I feel.
Philip, you mentioned before how important water is, how it's the new oil, how it's central to the problems facing populations around the world. What changes have you witnessed in the oceans that you would attribute to industrial fishing?
That is an area which is very close to my heart, Glenn. I spent a lot in the last 15 years of my time with Sea Shepherd, investing millions of dollars with them. They are a remarkable organization. I got involved with them when they had one tiny little ship of 650 tons called the Farley Mowat. And look at them today. They are on every ocean with 12 massive ships. The fishing industry is controlled by criminals. There is no other way to describe it. I recently spent some time on a Sea Shepherd ship in West African Atlantic. And Sea Shepherd has signed MOUs under the great man, Captain Peter Hammerstead, in many countries in West Africa. And those artisanal fishers who've survived for centuries feeding their kids are now starving, because now we have poachers coming from other countries and cleaning out their oceans. They're starving. It is no wonder why so many of them have turned to piracy. And who are these pirates? They're the European Union and China. China's distant water fleet probably has in excess of 20,000 ships, and they are everywhere. We have photographs of them. They're not very far from Galapagos and Ecuador. So many ships, and when they turn on their lights at night, it looks like a city. But when they come into these places like Liberia and Saint Tomé and Principe and Gabon and the Gambia, places like that, they turn off the AIS. So they go dark. They can't be seen. But now they're getting caught. Sea Shepherd has already arrested, I think it might be over 64 ships from the European Union and China. And I think it might be probably over 10 million euros in fines that have been levied against the owners and the captains and masters of these ships. Many of the captains and the crews, or masters of these ships, have gone to prison. Basically because one small organization had the intelligence to negotiate important initiatives with these governments to stop illegal poaching in these areas. So hopefully we will have many more MOUs signed in Africa soon, hopefully in Asia as well. But as you know, as China flexes her military muscles and moves further into the South China Seas, infringing on the fishing rights of the Philippines and Thailand and Malaysia and places like that. And of course, the Belt and Road project is going to tie up all those countries as well. So the geopolitics is going to become very, very fraught and very complex. I was looking at my projects in Africa not very long ago, and I flew in a helicopter over the bush and went out with the rangers at night to look at the poaching operations. And everywhere you go, you see evidence of China. They're building shopping malls, railheads, roads, ports, right across the continent. The world is getting so complex. And unfortunately, in the last 4 or 5 years, America has taken a back seat to all this. There was a time when America led the world in dealing with these complex geopolitical problems. But right now, they're not even at the starting gate. So China's and other countries as well are moving into these vacuums. So I think that the future is going to be tough. Sorry.
As this overfishing and poaching is taking place, what's happening to the coral reefs and the health of the ocean itself?
Yes, it is the best example I can give you is our Great Barrier Reef here in Australia, the biggest, most beautiful, iconic reef in the world. And our indolent, incompetent, right-wing government has allowed an Indian entrepreneur who's constantly sailing under a cloud in his own country in India to come to Australia and build a massive coal mine in that area. And the runoff from that disgusting, filthy coal mine is going to kill the barrier reef. And the barrier reef is already dying. And of course, Glenn, you know, living in the States, that the oceans are in a very bad state. There's over 1 million square kilometers, for example, of dead zones, hypoxic dead zones. You drop a fish in that water and the fish will die. And those dead zones are growing rapidly, largely because of animal agriculture. The runoff and the nutrients from farming is running into the riverine systems and into the lakes and into the seas, and they're poisoning the ocean. And that is going to accelerate the death of the lifeblood of our civilization. And nobody seems to know, but even the people who know don't seem to care. So the oceans are a significant battleground for the environmental and animal rights movement. I mean, you've got to look at the Pacific Gyre. It's now so full of plastic junk and human feces. It's created a floating footprint bigger than India. I made a film in India called The Plastic Cow, and we bought about 100 cows from the municipality and operated on them. And on an average, we found about 50 kilos of plastic in the cow's stomach. The cows work all day and are let loose in the street at night, and they forage in the rubbish. And they eat plastic, wires, syringes. These animals are in absolute agony. There's not a single cow in the street of India that does not have plastic in its stomach. And we took that case, part of a broader case, to the court, to the Supreme Court in New Delhi. And the Honorable Justice said, plastic poses a greater threat to India than thermonuclear war. We are a stupid species. You probably want to edit some of these things out, Gustavo, because you're such a refined, enlightened man, not used to having such an aggressive Australian on the other end of the phone.
No, I have Dr. McDougall that says things just like that, or worse. No, not worse. Actually, they need to be said. And I think that one of the big problems we have is people not realizing how everything is connected. So what you do to the river, it does to the ocean, and what you do to the land, it goes to the river. And we just live in our own little worlds and go to the supermarket and buy food and whatever. And we don't realize that it's the inner connection. But hopefully,
you're absolutely correct. You know, I was guilty too. When I was a young man, I was young and ambitious in my 20s, and I was a merchant banker, investment banker, and I was asked to go out to see a client, a conglomerate, and they had interests in many different industries. So I went out to have a look at all of them. I was advising them on a large corporate transaction, and one of the industries that they owned turned out to be a slaughterhouse. Now, please bear in mind, my favorite food at the time was filet mignon and lobster, a fact for which I'm so profoundly ashamed today. But what I saw that day in that slaughterhouse absolutely terrified me. I immediately became a vegetarian. But I didn't know enough. I was too innocent, too ignorant to know about the dairy industry. On one occasion, shortly after that, I was on a business trip to India. I was walking down the street, and I saw a dairyman dragging his cow to the slaughterhouse. The cow had been hit by a lorry and had broken her spine. She was in agony. To get her to move, he was throwing chili powder into her eyes and shoving sharp objects up her anus. Beside her was her skinny, scrawny, starving calf. Now, when he got to the gates of the slaughterhouse, before he handed the cow over to the butcher, the bastard milked her. So even at the last moment of her life, she was still being abused. So I came back to Australia and I studied the dairy industry, and I discovered that dairy is not what I thought, a benign, beautiful picture of hills and grass and streams, a chocolate box of Wordsworth and Keats and Shelley and beautiful poetry. It's a gulag of despair. It's a disgusting industry. It has no place in civilized society. And milk is meat in liquid form. So I've got dairy very much in my crosshairs. And the sooner that filthy industry is replaced by oat and rice milk and almond milk and a whole range of others, the better. I can't wait for that beautiful day to dawn.
Yes, definitely. I do too. Glenn, do you have anything else you want to add?
I seem to have frozen again.
Oh.
Was it something I said, Glenn?
But I was just going to ask, though, on an optimistic vein, how do you see the transition to the transformation of the world to a vegan diet? How do you see it taking place?
The trends in many ways are positive. particularly in the West and in some parts of Asia as well. China still has a great difficulty in coming to grips with getting off the meat and pork, particularly the pork industry. Difficulty changing directions. India, unfortunately, is following the West. Africa is in the doldrums in that particular department. But I think a time will come when there'll be meat substitutes, and we've seen it, that compete very favorably with slaughter meat. And I think that we will find a substitute good to replace this slaughter bad. And I think that will happen fairly swiftly. So I think it depends on how quickly this industry grows. I think it has to happen on a variety of fronts. It has to happen in market. We need new kinds of products that are sold to replace meat. We need to have new kinds of politicians. I also think we need a new form of jurisprudence, a fora concetiae, a court of the conscience. And in many places, I do see that happening. In fact, I see that happening in the projects in India. The Kindness Kids project, which I started 15 years ago. Some of the young people who are coming through right now are not only telling their parents they never want to eat animals again, these kids are becoming activists as well. So there is hope. I'm also fairly hopeful about China. Regardless of all the dreadful things that they do, I'll say one thing about China. Once they decide to do something, good or bad, but once they decide to do it, it'll happen overnight. I have great admiration for their ability to make a decision and act on it swiftly. I visited China several times, but more recently, and I was amazed at the technology and the building and the roads and the qualities of people, the way they dress, the way they think, the education system. It is so far superior to the West in so many ways. It's embarrassing. And I think that one day, very soon, we will have people in China who will make that decision that they've got to get off the meat and dairy drug, and because they've got 1.4 billion people to feed, and they cannot possibly do it by doing what they're doing right now, and that is buying up vast plots of land here in Australia, right across Africa, and in South America, and using that to provide feedstock for their food industry at home. That won't work forever. So in a sense, I'm quietly optimistic about China because they are astonishingly smart. So I live in hope.
Yeah. Well, I like what you said, the meat and dairy drug, because we have to accept that people are addicted to these products. So that's going to be a challenge. But like you said, if new products are developed that can replace, hopefully this will happen.
Yes, I agree.
It's good.
And congratulations on your book, Glenn. You did a great job. And I must get a copy. I'm going to call Amazon. I've seen it. I've got a soft copy, obviously, but I need to get myself a hard copy to put in my bookshelf up here.
I'll send you one to Australia.
Oh, great! Please write something in it so I can tell people I know you.
I tell people I know you.
Thank you again.
It's a great pleasure. Take care.
Good to see you, Phil.
Okay.
Bye, Gustavo.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, Gustavo.
Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this as much as we did. And would you like to say anything, Len, to close our webinar?
No, I'm just delighted as always, Gustavo, to be part of it. And thank you to your audience. And We'll have one more session on the book next week, and it's not too late if you haven't read it yet to read a very short volume. You could read it in a couple of hours and understand the arguments why the leading cause of climate change is actually what we eat. It's actually animal agriculture. Well, it's not what we eat, but it's what they eat.
Right.
Some people out there who are making a mistake.
I want to clarify that we have 2 more sessions of the book club.
Oh, 2 more sessions. Oh,
Right.
Great.
2 more Mondays. So
2 more Mondays. Okay, great.
Next Monday we'll talk about chapters 3 and 4, and for the last session it'll be 5. Maybe there will be a cooking demo or a Q&A or another guest or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, there are 65 recipes in the book, folks.
Yes.
So, and they're all healthy.
Yes, and I've made several of those, and they're delicious.
Very good.
Well, thank you everybody for coming tonight to join us live. And if you're watching this later on as a replay, it helps me out a little bit if you subscribe to my channel. I know that most of you, if not all of you, are already subscribed, but if you haven't, please do it. It doesn't cost anything. Thank you very much. I'll see you next Monday, Glenn.
Thank you.
And everyone else. Okay, bye-bye.